The brass gate of the Whitmore Department Store elevator clanged shut with a finality that would haunt Thomas Brennan for the rest of his unnaturally long life. It was March 15th, 1912, and the 10-story building on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan stood as a monument to modern commerce and engineering prowess. The Otis hydraulic passenger elevator, installed just 3 years earlier with great fanfare and newspaper coverage, was considered the pinnacle of safety technology. What the newspapers hadn't reported was that the building's foundation had been constructed over a series of abandoned subway tunnels from the city's earliest rapid transit experiments. Tunnels that ran far deeper than any architectural plans had ever documented. Thomas, the store's head elevator operator, had been running the lift for 18 months without it. At 34, he possessed the steady nerves and precise timing required to manage the delicate hydraulic controls that lifted customers between floors with smooth, practiced efficiency. His passenger that morning was Miss Catherine Morse, a regular customer and daughter of a prominent banking family, who had specifically requested Thomas operate the elevator for a shopping expedition. At 26, Catherine was known for her sharp wit and modern sensibilities, qualities that had made her something of a controversial figure in New York social circles. The trouble began when Catherine pressed the button for the third floor to visit the ladies' millinery department. Thomas engaged the hydraulic mechanism as he had done thousands of times before, but instead of the familiar smooth ascent, the elevator lurched violently downward. The brass needle on the floor indicator spun wildly past the lobby, past what should have been the basement, continuing downward beyond any floor that existed in the building's blueprints. "Mr. Brennan," Catherine said, her voice maintaining remarkable composure despite the obvious mechanical failure, "I believe we may have encountered a difficulty." Thomas was frantically working the controls, pulling levers and adjusting pressure valves. But the elevator continued its impossible descent. The building's foundation was only supposed to extend 15 feet below street level. Yet they had been falling for nearly a minute at a speed that suggested they were descending far beyond the boundaries of the physical structure above them. "Miss Morse," Thomas replied, sweat beading on his forehead despite the increasingly cool air in the elevator car, "I must confess this is unlike any mechanical failure I've witnessed. The hydraulic system appears to be responding to pressure differentials that shouldn't exist." The elevator car was illuminated by a single electric bulb, its warm glow creating dancing shadows on the ornate brass fittings and mahogany paneling. Through the decorative iron grillwork of the car's sides, they should have been seeing the familiar brick walls of the elevator shaft. Instead, they glimpsed something far more unsettling. Smooth stone surfaces that appeared to be carved rather than constructed, with symbols and markings that bore no resemblance to any architectural style either had ever encountered. Catherine moved closer to the grillwork, peering into the darkness beyond. "Thomas, those markings on the walls, they appear to be glowing with their own light." "That's not possible, is it?" Thomas joined her at the side of the car, his trained eye studying the impossible vista passing by outside. The walls seemed to pulse with a faint phosphorescent glow, and the symbols appeared to shift and writhe as if alive. More disturbing still, the symbols seemed to respond to their presence, growing brighter as the elevator continued its descent into regions that defied all logic and physics. "In my experience with hydraulic systems," Thomas said carefully, "elevator cars cannot descend beyond their installed shaft depth. Yet we have been falling for several minutes, and I estimate we've traveled at least 300 feet below the building's foundation. This violates every principle of engineering I understand." The elevator's descent began to slow, and both passengers felt their stomachs settle as the car finally came to a gentle stop. The brass gate opened with its familiar mechanical precision, but beyond lay not the familiar department store floors they knew, but a corridor carved from solid rock and illuminated by the same mysterious phosphorescent glow they had observed during their descent. Catherine stepped toward the threshold, her practical boots clicking on the elevator's brass flooring. "Mr. Brennan, we appear to have two choices. Remain in this car and hope it returns us to familiar territory, or explore what lies beyond and perhaps discover the mechanism by which we might return ourselves. Thomas checked his pocket watch, a reliable Waltham timepiece that had belonged to his father. The hands had stopped at exactly 10:47 a.m., the precise moment they had begun their impossible descent. He tapped the crystal, but the hands remained frozen in place, but if time itself had ceased to function in their current location. Miss Morse, I feel obligated to point out that venturing into unknown territory would be highly irregular and potentially dangerous. However, I must also acknowledge that remaining in the elevator offers no guarantee of return, and the hydraulic system continues to behave in ways that challenge my professional understanding. They stepped together into the corridor beyond the elevator. The phosphorescent symbols on the walls pulsed more brightly at their approach, and they could hear a distant sound, like machinery, and operating at frequencies that seemed to resonate in their bones rather than their ears. The corridor stretched in both directions, disappearing into darkness that the glowing symbols could not fully penetrate. Catherine possessed the practical education that many women of her social standing lacked, having insisted on studying geology and archaeology against her family's wishes. As they walked, she examined the wall carvings with growing fascination and concern. Thomas, these symbols predate any known civilization in this region. The carving techniques and the stone itself suggest an age that would place their creation thousands of years before European settlement, possibly before any known human habitation of Manhattan Island. Thomas, whose practical experience with the building's infrastructure had given him intimate knowledge of the city's underground systems, was equally disturbed by what they were discovering. Miss Morse, according to the city's geological surveys, this area should be nothing but schist bedrock and water table. There should be no caverns, no carved passages, and certainly no source for the illumination we're observing. As they progressed deeper into the corridor, they began to encounter side passages and chambers that defied architectural logic. Some rooms contained what appeared to be machinery, enormous brass and copper constructions that hummed with invisible energy and bore disturbing similarities to the hydraulic systems Thomas knew so well. Other chambers held objects that neither could identify, crystalline formations that sang with musical tones when approached, and metallic devices that seemed to respond to their presence by adjusting their configuration. The most disturbing discovery came when they entered a circular chamber dominated by a massive mechanism that bore an unmistakable resemblance to an elevator control system. Banks of brass levers and pressure gauges surrounded a central shaft that extended both upward and downward beyond the range of their vision. The controls were labeled with the same glowing symbols they had seen throughout their journey, but interspersed among them were familiar Arabic numerals and English words. Catherine approached the control panel with academic curiosity overriding caution. Thomas, some of these labels appear to reference floors and buildings that don't exist. Subbasement 47, underground mezzanine C, foundational level theta. It's as if this system serves buildings throughout the city that extend far deeper than anyone realizes. Thomas studied the mechanical aspects of the system with professional interest. The hydraulic principles were familiar, but implemented on a scale that dwarfed anything he had encountered in conventional elevator installation. Pressure gauges indicated hydraulic forces that would require pumping stations the size of city blocks. And the pipe network suggested a system that extended not just beneath their current building, and throughout the entire underground network beneath Manhattan. Miss Morse, I believe we have discovered something that challenges our understanding of the city's infrastructure. This appears to be a transportation system that predates the city's official construction, yet incorporates engineering principles that are more advanced than anything currently in use. Their exploration was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps, not the click of leather saws on stone, but the deliberate mechanical rhythm of clockwork. From the shadows beyond the control chamber emerged a figure that defied easy description. Humanoid in general proportions, it appeared to be constructed of the same brass and copper materials as the machinery around them. but it moved with purpose and intelligence that suggested consciousness rather than mere automation. The figure spoke, its voice emanating from a resonating chamber in its chest rather than anything resembling human vocal cords. Passengers from Surface Level 1, you have accessed the foundational transport network without proper authorization. Your presence has been noted and reported to the Administrative Council. Please state the nature of your transportation requirements. Catherine, drawing upon her social training in managing unusual situations, stepped forward with diplomatic composure. We are Catherine Morse and Thomas Brennan, and we accessed this system unintentionally through a malfunction in the Whitmore Department Store. We require return passage to Surface Level 1, building designation 47B. The mechanical figure consulted a device that appeared to be part of its own construction, accessing information through processes that operated beyond their understanding. After several minutes, it responded. Surface Level 1 transport authorization expired on calendar date March 15, 1847. Current passengers lack proper documentation for inter-level travel. Administrative review required. Thomas felt a chill of understanding. 1847, that's 65 years ago. You're saying our authorization to return to the surface expired before either of us was born. Temporal displacement is a known side effect of unauthorized access to the foundational transport network, the figure replied. Surface-level protocols require passengers to maintain continuous authorization or face administrative review. Passengers experiencing temporal displacement must petition the Administrative Council for emergency return passage. The implications of their situation began to settle over them like a suffocating weight. Catherine's analytical mind grasped the horror first. We're not just lost underground, Thomas. According to this entity, we're lost in time as well. The elevator didn't just take us too far down. It took us outside the normal flow of time entirely. The mechanical figure gestured toward a passage that led deeper into the complex. Passengers requiring administrative review must report to council chambers, sublevel 847. Transport will be provided. Please note that review processes may require extended processing periods measured in surface-level decades or centuries. Thomas looked back toward the corridor that led to their elevator, but the familiar brass car was no longer visible. In its place stood another mechanical figure, identical to the first, apparently serving as a guardian to prevent unauthorized return access. Miss Morse, Thomas said quietly, I believe our situation has progressed beyond a simple mechanical failure. We are dealing with forces and systems that operate according to rules that bear no resemblance to the world we knew. Catherine nodded grimly, her mind already working to understand their options. Then we must adapt quickly, Thomas. If we are to have any hope of returning to our own time and place, we must first understand the rules of this one. They followed the mechanical figure deeper into the network, passing through chambers that revealed the true scope of the underground system. Vast halls contained dozens of elevator cars from different eras, some recognizable as contemporary Otis installations, others bearing designs that appeared to be from decades in the future, and still others that incorporated technologies that defied classification entirely. In one chamber, they observed other displaced passengers, a woman in colonial dress who appeared to have been waiting for decades, her clothes somehow preserved but her eyes holding the weight of unimaginable years. A man in what appeared to be clothing from the distant future, his garments incorporating materials and designs that had never been seen on the surface world. All bore the same expression of resigned acceptance, as if they had long ago abandoned hope of return. The Administrative Council, when they finally encountered it, consisted of three figures similar to their guide, but larger and more ornate in construction. They sat behind a curved desk carved from the same glowing stone as the corridor walls, consulting documents that appear to be written in multiple languages and time periods simultaneously. The central figure spoke. Passengers Morse and Brennan, you have accessed the foundational transport network during a period of temporal instability. Standard return protocols are suspended pending resolution of surface-level discontinuities. You may petition for emergency return passage, but approval requires compensation in the form of service to the network. Catherine leaned forward, her natural negotiation instincts taking precedence over fear. What form of service would be required for our return passage? The network requires surface-level representatives to assist with passenger management and system maintenance. Service period, 50 surface-level years. Compensation includes temporal stabilization, extended life span commensurate with service requirements, and basic sustenance for the duration of service. Thomas felt the weight of the offer settle on his shoulders like a physical burden. 50 years of service in exchange for the possibility of return, not the guarantee, but merely the possibility. Yet what alternative did they have? They had seen the other passengers, some of whom had clearly been waiting far longer than 50 years for their own opportunity at return. And if we refuse? Catherine asked. Passengers without authorization or service commitment become permanent residents of the network. Transport to surface levels becomes unavailable indefinitely. Accommodation will be provided in residential sector 12. They looked at each other, understanding passing between them without words. They had stepped into an elevator for a simple shopping trip and instead had fallen through the fabric of reality itself into a system that operated according to its own incomprehensible rules. Catherine spoke first. Thomas, it appears our choices are limited to 50 years of service with the possibility of return, or permanent residence in this underground realm with no hope of seeing our own world again. Thomas nodded slowly, his practical mind already adapting to their impossible circumstances. Miss Morse, in all my experience with mechanical systems, I've learned that sometimes the only way to understand a machine is to become part of it. Perhaps 50 years of service will provide us with the knowledge necessary to find our own way back. They accepted the council's offer, not because they believed it offered genuine hope of return, but because it represented the only path forward that preserved any possibility of seeing their own world. What they could not have known was that the network's definition of 50 years operated according to its own temporal calculations, and that the service they would perform would eventually transform them into something that could navigate between the surface world and the underground realm. The elevator that had carried them too far down had not been the end of their story, but the beginning of an existence that would span centuries and dimensions. Thomas Brennan, the practical elevator operator, and Catherine Morse, the analytical socialite, would become guides for future passengers who found themselves displaced by the city's hidden transportation. They would learn to operate elevators that traveled not just between floors, but between years and decades and centuries. And late at night, in buildings throughout New York City, observant passengers still report encounters with an unusually knowledgeable operator and an elegant woman who seemed to know far more about the building's history than any normal employee should. They appear most frequently when elevators malfunction, guiding confused passengers safely back to familiar floors and warning them away from buttons that shouldn't exist on any normal control panel. The foundational transport network continues to operate beneath the city, its brass and copper machinery humming with impossible energy, transporting passengers who take wrong turns in space and time. And somewhere in the depths, Thomas and Catherine continue their service, having learned that some journeys can only be completed by those willing to help others find their way home, even when home exists in a time and place they themselves may never see again. Their 50 years of service ended long ago, but they remain in the network by choice, having discovered that some elevators lead not just to different floors, but to different possibilities entirely. And perhaps that is the most important lesson of all, that sometimes going too far down is the only way to understand how high you can truly rise.